Hi everyone, and welcome to this tutorial about quartal and quintal harmony. Now, if you watched earlier videos of mine about building chords, modes and scales, you know by now that most of the music is built by tertian harmony. And this means that chords used in this way are built by stacking third intervals. This results in triads, 7 chords and all the upper extensions like the 11th, the 9th and 13th chords, and all the chords in the scale having a specific function in tertian harmony. Now, we perceive this harmony as tonal, with one gravitational point, which is of course the tonic. Now in this video we are going to explore a whole other cup of tea, namely the quartal and the related quintal harmony, which is in contrast to the traditional tertian harmony, ambiguous and offers an alternative to composing music and making some interesting and open modern sounds. Like tertian harmony is built from third intervals, quartal harmony is built from intervals of fourths. And these fourth intervals can be perfect, diminished or augmented. So the obvious quartal chord on the note C can be constructed of the notes C, F and B flat, all perfect fourths. Now we could also make a 4-note quartal chord in perfect fourths on the note C with the notes C, F, B flat and E flat. And the variation would be C, F, B, E, in which we use an augmented fourth between the F and the B. The related quintal harmony uses fifth intervals to create chords. Again, this could be a perfect fifth, diminished fifth and an augmented fifth. A 4-note quintal chord on the note C would be constructed of the notes C, G, D and A. Now what is very important to understand is that both quartal and quintal chords are ambiguous and they have no tonal center. Every note in the chord can function as a root. Most of the time the note that claims the melody points towards the key or mode. Still, it will be a rootless harmony most of the time. Now quartal chords do not need to be a stack of fourths, they only have to be able to arrange to a quartal chord. Now the best examples are the suspended 2 and the suspended 4 chords. A C suspended 2 chord, for instance, can be rearranged to be a D quartal chord like this. Now the same goes for the suspended 4 chord, like C sus4, and this chord is easily transformed to an ambiguous sounding quartal chord on the note G like this. Now believe it or not, polyphonic fourth intervals are as old as the Middle Ages. Then they were seen as consonant intervals, and the period that followed the fourth interval was much more perceived as a dissonant sound that needed to resolve. Now it was only in the beginning of the 20th century that quartal harmony was reinstalled by a new vision on harmony. Now one, if not the first example, is a famous chord used by Wagner in his opera Tristan and Isolde, where he uses a quartal chord that consists of an augmented and a perfect fourth interval. And this chord was baptized to the Tristan chord. Now, lots of impressionist composers like Claude Debussy and Erik Satie used the chords later on in their magnificent compositions that had the urge to move away from the traditional tonal harmony. Now later composers like Paul Hindemith and Arnold Schoenberg used quartal chords in lots of their compositions. And in jazz the quartal harmony provided a way to create richness and color to compositions, especially starting in the 50s, where the brass section moved in fourths and the piano provided an additional minimalistic harmony on top of that. Charlie Parker, Bill Evans used a chord consisting of 3 fourth intervals and a third interval on top in their song So What. It's really just an inversion of a 5-tone quartal chord, but this chord is considered to be a benchmark and everybody knows this chord as the So What chord. Now when jazz musicians started to use the church modes like Dorian, Lydian and so on, quartal harmony was used extensively, especially by composers like Herbie, Hancock, MCCoy, Tyner and Corea, to name a few. In rock music, we have to search in the progressive rock genre where Robert Fripp went so far he used a complete new tuning for playing in fourths instead of thirds, which he called his new standard tuning, abbreviated by NST. Emerson, Lake and Palmer used quartal harmony on their album Tarkus, and who else? Frank Zappa used it in Zoot Allures. So now we've seen two famous quartal chords combine. The Tristan chord, created by Wagner, an augmented fourth stacked on a perfect fourth, F, B, D and G for instance. The so what chord, like E, A, D, G and B. And the third one I didn't mention before is the one created by the Russian composer Alexander Scriabin. I think that's how you pronounce it. He called this chord the mystic chord, consisting of an augmented, diminished, augmented and two perfect fourths, like C, F sharp, B flat, E, A and D. Now basically there are three types of inversions and they have a similarity with tertian triads. Now about the tertian triads, they are built out of two building blocks, the major third and the minor third. By varying the order we'll get four types of triads: the major, the minor, the diminished and the augmented. Now more or less the same goes for quartal chords that also have two building blocks, namely the perfect fourth and the augmented fourth. Now when combining all the possibilities we'll get a augmented fourth and a perfect fourth, a perfect fourth and an augmented fourth, and perfect fourth and a perfect fourth. Now, an augmented fourth and an augmented fourth does not create a proper quartal chord because two augmented fourths result in an octave. Now, sometimes beside quartal harmony, you'll hear the term quintal harmony. Every interval except for the prime, of course, has an inversion. And the fifth interval is an inversion of the fourth interval and the other way around. Now this is why quintal harmony isn't a real different harmony, but much more a part of quartal harmony. And every quartal chord can be written as a quintal chord by reordering the notes. So the quartal chord C, F, B flat can be written as B flat, F, C and will be a quintal chord. Now other inversions cripple the quartal structure, but it stays a quartal chord. If we look at the inversion of the quartal chord C, F, B flat, we'll notice that we can't recognize the quartal chord that easy, but can still generate very interesting sounds. Of course you could implement quartal voicings as soundscapes, not having a gravity towards a particular key center. But you can also use them in a tonal setting where there is a key center. But we'll make it more ambiguous by using quartal voicings. So you could harmonize the C major scale with the tertian triads on every note of the scale. Just like this: C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, C major. But we could also arrange this to be a sequence of quartal chords within the same C major key, like this. Now this technique can also be projected on modes, of course. Say we use the same C major key but start on the note D. Then we get a Dorian sound. Harmonize the scale of C major with the chords that are built by stacking fourths. Now we could do the same with the melodic minor scale, which gives an even more interesting sound. Although quartal chords are not built like regular chords, we can still treat them as such and find names for the chords that we use in tertian harmony. If we build a quartal chord on the note E, then we get this chord: E, A, D, G and C, all perfect fourths. Now these notes can be a lot of things, like for instance an E minor 7 11th flat 13 chord, E being the root, A is the 11th, D the minor 7th, and G the minor 3rd, and C is the flat 13. But it can also be an A minor 11 chord. E is the 5th, A is the root, D is the 11th, G is the 7th, and C is the minor 3rd. And it can also be a D9 sus4 chord where E is the 9th, A is the 5th, D is the root, G is the 4th, and C is the minor 7th. And it can also function as a G sus4 6-9 chord. E is the 6th, A is the 9th, D is the 5th, G is the root, C is the 4th. But it can also be a so-called rootless voicing, a chord without a root. Like for instance an F major 13 chord without a root, or a B flat major 13 sharp 11 chord without a root. So you see, quartal chords can be a lot of things, and that makes them pretty ambiguous and creating some very modern sounds. Now within a key, there are several generic voicings for a typical chord, and we could distinguish three types of chords. The major chord on the 1st degree, the minor chord on the 2nd degree, and the dominant chord on the 5th degree, creating a 2-5-1 progression later on. Now let's take the C major key as an example. The generic quartal chord on the 1st degree is the C6-9 chord, an E, A, D, G, and C. This quartal chord starts on the 3rd of the chord. The second generic quartal chord on the 1st degree is the C major 9 chord, starting on the major 7th, B, E, A, D, and G. Now this chord is stronger than the 6-9 chord because it contains the major 7th besides the major 3rd. Now the generic quartal chord for a minor 2nd degree is a quartal chord ending on the minor 3rd of this 2nd degree chord. And this results in a D minor 11 chord. And there is a generic quartal chord for the dominant chord that results in a G13 chord. And this one starts on the minor 7th followed by the major 3rd. And this creates a tritone that is specific for a dominant chord. Now the quartal chord looks like this: F, B, E, A, D, G. So now we can create a 2-5-1 progression in the key of C major with these generic quartal chords: D minor 11, G13, and C major 9. One rule that you should keep in mind to create sensible quartal chords. And quartal chords sound stronger if they contain the 3rd and the 7th and do not contain the so-called avoid note. Now these avoid notes are particularly bad sounding notes when they are on top or at the bottom. When they are lying in between the other notes, you could get away with it. So here is a list of avoid notes for each chord in the key, and in this case the major key. Now the avoid note for the chord on the 1st degree, C major 7, is the 4th, the note F. The avoid note for the chord on the 2nd degree, D minor 7, is the 6th, the note B. And the avoid note for the 3rd degree, E minor 7, are two notes, the 2nd and the minor 6th, the F and C. The chord on the 4th degree, the F major 7 chord, has no avoid notes. The avoid note for the dominant chord, G7, is the 4th, and that's the note C. And the avoid note for the 6th degree, A minor 7th, is the minor 6th, the note F. And the avoid note for the half diminished chord on the 7th degree, the B minor 7 flat 5 chord, is the minor 2nd, the note C. So 4-note quartal chords that are suited for C major chord, and extensions of course of this chord, are B, E, A, D, E, A, D, G, and A, D, G, and C. Those chords do not contain the avoid note. Now if we play a note in the bass that is very present, we can grant ourselves more freedom with chords that are not part of the key, but do sound interesting if you use them well. Now those chords are in-between chords, or a better name is a passing chord. Now still, we have to know what the landing chord should be. Those are the chords that have a strong connection with the mode or key we are playing in. So in D Dorian, the quartal landing chords are D, G, C, F, F, B, E and A. And although B is an avoid note, you can use this because the B is in between the other notes. But the better solution would be a quartal chord on the note A, D, G and C. Now, when the bass note D is very present, we can now alter between landing chords, non-landing chords and chords that lie in between that do not belong to the mode. Also very interesting is using an inversion. One in particular is very suited for freewheeling. We invert the quartal chord D sharp, G sharp, C sharp to G sharp, C sharp, D sharp and put the root E beneath this inversion. Now from here we can search for outside sounds with this inversion instead of chords within the key, just like this. Another example of using chords that are not in the key is when using secondary dominants are used played as a quartal chord. Now in the next progression the upper shapes are all quartal chords. The progression looks like this: C, A, D minor, G. And we could use the 4 quartal chords on top of the root of these chords to create a modern open sound. So B, E, A on top of the root C creates a C major 13 chord. D flat, G and C on top of the root A creates an A7 sharp 9 sound. C, F, B on top of a D root creates a D minor 13 sound. And F, B, E and A on top of the root G creates a G13 sound. So now we have this progression. By using these quartal chords, the progression sounds really open, modern and ambiguous. Now, quarter harmony is an indispensable asset for creating modern open sounds that result in a beautiful contrast with common tertian harmony. There are a lot of different ways these ambiguous quartal chords can be used, and you can use them in tonal and non-tonal circumstances. Now, especially in jazz, these chords come to life, but there's no reason they shouldn't be used in, for instance, progressive rock, where they can enhance the sound to a more modern fusion-like experience. Now, the learning curve is a little steep, but like any other technique, it's just a matter of practice and improvising with this concept and turn it upside down to get it down. Greets from the Netherlands, and I see you next time in a QJamTracks crystal clear tutorial. Bye!